right. Well, thank you, Laura. And I'm so pleased to welcome our dear friend, Dr. Jamie Thomas, back to OFAR. Jamie is currently Dean of Social Sciences at Cypress College. And until recently, she was a coach for OFAR. And beyond that, Jamie, who has an academic background in linguistics, she is a many times published author. You can ask her about her books and her peer-reviewed journal articles if you want to get into the depths of linguistics with her. But within the California community colleges, she is also one of these all-around, just all-around powerhouses of support and encouragement and engagement. She's a facilitator for @ONE courses. I first met Jamie when I had the honor of co-facilitating the Equity and Student Culturally Responsive Pedagogy @ONE course with Jamie, and she made me a much better facilitator. She continues to facilitate courses for @ONE, really these days with a focus on OER and ZTC and how those intersect with equity and affordability across the system. And I'm sure she's up to a million other things that I'm unaware of, but probably writing another book for Oxford University Press or something. But we are so happy to have her here speaking to us once again about a topic that she's really engaged us with in years past. So, Jamie, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for that really warm welcome. And it's so true that I feel like my background as a faculty member in the California community colleges really propels me to do and continue this work of making connection, because I think it's when we make connection that we bring down ignorance and barriers to understanding. So let me share my screen with all of you, because I want to kind of walk us into a conversation about how do we communicate the importance of transformative pedagogies and advocate for those very students for whom we are having at the forefront of our project here. And I just want to give a shout out to all the OFAR advisory coaches and the team, because all of you provide a backbone to these wonderful conversations. Thank you. So today, this conversation is really about thinking about the challenges we face in communication with faculty, students, and other colleagues, and how do we sort of anticipate detractors to the type of work we're trying to do and respond to that through our teaching or through our efforts, and in a way communicate beyond the words that we choose to describe our activities. And recognizing that students, faculty, colleagues, we're all kind of contending with what change means in our different avenues of work. So maybe this is breaking news, maybe it's not, but there is sort of an issue going on across our country right now with responses to efforts that have been umbrellified under the term diversity, equity, and inclusion. And there's multiple kind of permutations of DEI. We have a DEI that may also have anti-racism or accessibility as a party to it. But understanding that there are some folks that feel that policies of this nature violate free speech, that they break anti-discrimination laws, and maybe that they're a misuse of public funds. And so with that as kind of a frame to which to respond or understand, that gives us a sense that our communication about these efforts is super, super important. And so, just looking at the Chronicle of Higher Ed, recent stories about responses to what we might call progressive policies in education, taking away DEI funding, offices, space on campus. Recently in the California community colleges, we have a push to tie some of our faculty evaluation strategies to an understanding of how to reach wider groups of students. And so there's been some pushback on that as well. Some professors are suing, and they're wondering, how is it that I would be able to incorporate issues of accessibility, diversity, equity, inclusion in the work that I do, perhaps as a chemist, right? If I don't agree with this ideology, what does that mean? So I want to take us to a different moment, right? And I'm sharing with you now a photo from the Cesar Chavez National Monument. And that's because Cesar Chavez Day is right sort of around the corner, right? And I love this space. It's out near Bakersfield in Keene, California. And I had a chance over the summer to visit with my sister. And when you walk into that space, you're calmed by all of the floral scents. You're calmed by learning about the workers' rights, farm workers' rights movements that Cesar Chavez was a leader and a party to, along with Dolores Huerta and others. And you are also comforted by the sense that this is somebody who thought beyond themselves in the work that they did. He said, es mi más profunda creencia que solo al entregar nuestras vidas encontramos la vida. And so what he was saying there is, it's my deepest belief that only by giving our lives do we find life. I find that restorative in the sense that even when we find detractors in this work, we are working for something greater. We're working for something beyond that one classroom or that one lesson or that syllabus, because we're trying to have an aggregate effect for many of the students, for really all of the students in our system. And then I want to bring us back to Dr. Maya Angelou, right? Someone who is noted for her activism in and through the arts. She says, that she's learned that people will maybe forget what you said. They might even forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And I think between what she stated here and what Cesar Chavez gives us as sort of an imperative, that's what I'm using as I continue forward. So I want to give you a quick example of how I'm incorporating these philosophies in my everyday work. Yesterday, I had a meeting with my whole division of part-time and full-time faculty in social sciences at Cypress College. And as just part of the agenda that I sent out and used as talking points through the meeting, I incorporated some elements that I think jive well with the sense of what we're doing here in OFAR. And that was some thoughts about the syllabus. And so I just added, as part of what I was doing there, hey, folks, you're encouraged to add a friendly instructor photo and an about your instructor or dear students letter to your syllabus. For many students, this may be their first opportunity to learn more about you. And the reason why I put it here in this way is that I was thinking about my messaging, right? My central goal was to get some folks to consider taking up an action that they hadn't before. And I wanted to present this in a way that wasn't an affront, it wasn't a challenge, it was simply a part of doing business. And that's the mindset that I want some of my colleagues to sort of take up. Not that we're doing anti-racist or other actions as an addition to what we're doing, but rather that we are embedding it in our everyday practices. So if we can get in that mindset, then we're really not fighting against anything more than what we're already doing. Wow. So that's something that I'm holding on to. Now, I'd like for us to kind of pause and switch modes. Let's take about 4 minutes here. I'm going to show a map to you, okay? And I think I also have a link to this map that I can share. But really, there's nothing that you need to type or write on the map, okay? I just want you to think of 3 questions. Think about answers to these 3 questions. What area of the world do you think is represented by this map? What is the word for east based on what you see in this map? And how does this map make you feel? Okay, is everybody ready? All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so here's a view of the map. I'm going to give you a couple minutes. Just jot down your thoughts, right? The question is, what sort of world region or landmass is represented by this map? And what is the word for east, do you think, for this map? And how does this map make you feel? And so you may be looking at the corners of the map, the middle of the map, and the wording on that map. And so when you're ready to continue, can you just give me a thumbs up reaction there in the Zoom or add it to the chat? All right. I'm seeing a few thumbs up. Thank you so much. Kelly is saying in the chat, it's home. So Kelly sees something in this map. Awesome. And what you're seeing could be something that connects with your worldview, your sense of home, as it were, right? So go ahead and take a moment and share your reactions in the chat. Let's follow up with Kelly's idea there. What are you seeing in this map, and how does it make you feel? Kelly saying she's from the bottom edge of the map. Awesome. Devin O'Rourke is saying, I see Anishinaabe, Ojibwe lands, and I feel centered and grounded in the landscape shown. Richard saying, confused. Absolutely. All of these are valid responses to this map. Don is saying, looks like a sideways version of the Great Lakes. Magda, I don't understand it. Kim, ironically disoriented. Sure, absolutely. Cindy, it's green, feels full of gorgeous lakes. Absolutely. Dr. Megan Lorraine is sort of saying maybe this word wabang is the word for east. And some of you are seeing things that others are not seeing, right? Or you want to be curious and engage with this map. All of these are great responses to the map. And so what I want you to sort of consider is this is a decolonial map. This is a map intended to challenge your sense of centeredness and to get you to think about what it is that we rely on so much in our orientation to space within our Western sort of mandate here, right? What this map depicts, if you kind of turn your head to the left or the right, you can sort of see and make out the outlines of what we call the Great Lakes, but what is referred to within the Ojibwe worldview as Nayano Nibimang Gichigamin, right? And I'm saying that with my own accent, so I'm probably fairly off on that. But you can see a landmass that we might recognize today as Michigan. But what this map really does is it reminds you that there are other ways to approach the world. There are other languages through which to see and regard space, and that even pointing north upward is not a given, right? So what it does is it destabilizes or disrupts the Western frame that we work in. And I find this to be a very interesting strategy and transformative for many of my students in linguistics who are struggling with the sense of what does it mean to decolonize our thinking, or what does it mean to think in different ways. When we ask them to embrace a language they may have never connected with, we're asking for a different sensibility. And what I would like to encourage you to think about is what is the equivalent of a decolonial map for your teaching subject? The way I've used this map is I ask students to use tools and strategies that we've learned through our exploration of word parts and word meanings to sort of decode what morphology or word parts are being used within this language. We also talk about language and culture connections. So this becomes a really important lesson in my linguistics class, my intro to linguistics class, for example. And in that regard, I can use classic concepts from linguistics, but teach them through an indigenous frame. And that not only expands my experience as someone who is a non-Indigenous person, but it also serves that for my students as well, some of whom may be Indigenous, but perhaps not from the Ojibwe cultural context. And then thinking about open pedagogy, how might you co-create such content or such transformational exercises with your students? I want to share also the way that I have incorporated this in a previous class. And so now you're seeing a view of my Canvas page where I'm asking students in an asynchronous environment, how do you see it? So previous to receiving a view of the map, they're getting some of the similar questions that I shared with you as well. And I present this as a low stakes task. What do you see? Share it out with us, right? And don't worry about outside information. Just work with what's in the map. And so I want to share some student responses to you with you. A student saying here, "Wow, this is so cool. It took me a minute to figure it out." And also, I grew up outside Chicago, so I should have gotten this quicker, right? So students are responding in many different ways. But what I love about it is this is another one of those exercises that you really couldn't engage an outside source or an artificial intelligence tool on. It's a personalized assignment, so it's an authentic sort of assessment. What do you understand of the concepts we've studied so far, and can you apply it to new context or new information? Another student with an Indigenous background talking about how this map for them invokes some of that dispossession that Native folks have been through within the Americas. And another student here saying that this adds a lot to their experience in this class because it expands their worldview and puts them into connection with Indigenous ways of thinking, ways of being. Um, so then after I present that map and I give students a chance to discuss it, then I try to go into, well, what did we just explore, right? Similar to what we're doing here in this space. And recognizing that disorientation is part of this exercise, but then taking a moment to connect that sense of disorientation to my teaching subject, which is linguistics. So then I talk about linguistic hegemony or linguistic imperialism and what impact that has even on our approach to the study of language within what we're calling linguistics now. Talk about our over-reliance in some cases on the English language and on Western thought paradigms. And in doing this in this way, now students have a concrete experience, a tangible experience to connect to this idea of Western or English or decolonization. Because it can be really powerful to give students an opportunity to actually discover how much they rely on certain worldviews and concepts. Because for many folks, these ideas, even this idea of anti-racism, is very abstract. We want to understand how do we actually implement it or use it as a tool to reshape our thinking. So more breaking news for you, right? And this is in terms of how far back and how deep some of these challenges to what we're trying to do in terms of transformative pedagogy really run, right? And so this is from 2022, just a couple of years ago, where folks are organizing to try to mount challenges to policies and ideas that really try to get at some of the root causes of barriers that students face in our schooling and some of those opportunity gaps and how they arise. And trying to inform and educate other folks from the perspective that brings challenge to these transformative pedagogies, rather than a chance to engage with what is really trying to be effected through changes in pedagogy. And we see academic freedom as sort of this proxy term for resistance to changing the status quo. So we have to recognize the ways that folks are trying to communicate their challenges to these policies. right? And when we're not really breaking down and talking about exactly what we mean by anti-racism, for example, or intersectionality, then those terms can go unanalyzed and then regarded as divisive because we're not really talking from the same definitions. And then we also have this idea of meritocracy, and that too is something that we need to analyze and understand. And currently now we're working under the Vision 2030 paradigm that the new chancellor for our statewide California community colleges is putting into place. But that Vision 2030 builds upon previous efforts, right, to kind of ensconce and cultivate diversity and inclusive practices within our system. And so even here, there is an understanding that we need to have a social justice perspective that regards equity as part of our just kind of day-to-day operations. And thinking too about these barriers and challenges that have led to underrepresentation of faculty and staff, even in the hiring piece on our campuses. So, things that some of you are experiencing, and I bring this data back from 2022, when we surveyed some of our OFAR participants to ask about their experiences. We had a mix of full-time and adjunct faculty as part of our group. And folks were unsure about how to recognize, rather report bias incidents that they had experienced, understanding that the reporting mechanisms vary from campus to campus or district to district. And they weren't sure if they were going to get support from their college after experiencing a bias incident, or people pushing back and showing visceral resistance to the work they're trying to do. So one thing to sort of keep in mind is that all of our campuses have this EEOP, or Equal Employment Opportunity Policy. And at the same time, it's still challenging, I think, for HR and other units to actually define and find concrete evidence in some cases about what constitutes harmful bias, what constitutes hostile work environment, microaggressions, email threats, and so forth. So there are some challenges with getting direct help when we're aggressed against. But I want to show you part of my strategy in dealing with adverse student responses. And that's because I get a lot of emails in my inbox, right? So this dates back to one of the times that I taught this Intro to Linguistics class. And I received an email from a student that was really concerned about sort of the way that I was incorporating intersectionality into the class. And the student sort of used various phrases and talked about their own perspective and ideology about how including intersectionality was not relevant to the teaching of linguistics, right? And I'm going to share with you, if I still have time, part of the exercise, a different exercise in the course that the student is responding to here. But one of the things you can sort of see is that even as the student is mounting their complaint, they are even describing their own low investment in the class exercises and activities. And so that's the other side of this, right? Is that folks are disengaging in some cases because they have preconceived ideas about what it is we're trying to deliver. And at the same time, we're working with students that have a lot of obligations and may want to insert a description of these obligations into the conversation to sort of justify or give rationale as to their perspective on difference. But at the same time, one of the things we're working to share with our students is a stronger understanding of what concepts such as intersectionality are really getting at. And intersectionality, as we understand it, is a research approach, really, to understanding how discrimination, and particularly anti-Black discrimination, persists throughout our society, despite having laws on the books that say that discrimination is bad, right? And understanding how that discrimination coordinates with other forms of exclusion, right? On the basis of disability, for example, or age, or sexuality and gender. All right. And so this student is struggling on multiple levels. But when we take a moment to really read what the student is saying, we can kind of appreciate where they're coming from. They have many different influences, right? So really, what are we observing here? And I want to sort of posit that there's something kind of exciting about sharing with students material that approaches the issues of discrimination and exclusion, but from different perspectives than perhaps they are used to. So I want to share in the chat an article with you that you can peruse and explore with your students perhaps as well. And this is an article that really focuses on deaf women's experiences when it comes to the college setting. And it's by Lisa Stapleton at Cal State Northridge. And what's really fascinating is that the article sort of details the life chances, how the life chances of deaf folks are affected by the perceptions of other people, right? Even so far as to sort of saying that hearing people are a part of the exclusion experience that deaf people have by and large, and that this sort of contributes to only 30% of deaf students successfully completing college. So this is part of what the student email was responding to, that we had read this article about language abilities and language differences, hearing ability and hearing differences, as it impacts the experiences of women college students. And part of the article sort of makes recommendations that more research and more action on the part of colleges needs to be taken in order to provide a more inclusive environment, more successful environment for all students. So what the student was resisting here, interestingly enough, was the decentering of whiteness within this space in this article, the decentering of even a hearing identity of maleness, and also the decentering of English and the modality centered around hearing and talking ability, right? A vocalized ability. So all of that is really destabilizing if your world is built on those anchors. If your world is built on that sense of normal, right? So when we present material like this in a class, what we're trying to do is effect a transformative shift of those tacit norms in the teaching and learning of X subject, right? And we can do that without even framing it as, say, a specific anti-racist action, but really just sort of saying, hey, here's another article that we're going to read as a part of our typical classroom undertaking, right? And still, students will find a challenge with that if that's not part of their understanding of themselves or difference. And so thinking about that, right, we have to, I think, be aware that there is an unnamed normalization of whiteness across our fields and across our understandings of morality, intelligence, beauty, and even ability, right? This assumption that characters in the story might be white, even when the descriptors are not explicitly stated, right? Say in a book like Harry Potter, for example, when I was reading that book as a what was I? Was I in junior high then? When that book first came out, I was imagining characters like Hermione, Harry, Parvati Patil. I was imagining all of them and what they might look like or sound like or be like, um, and trying to think about what I could anticipate. And then, it's different when a movie sort of fills in all the blanks. But all of those imaginings that we have to work their way through our worldview and everything that we've been exposed to. And here's another example of working with my students in linguistics as well. And I'm seeing such, I really appreciate everybody's attention here because I know that taking time on a Friday is rough sometimes. So I appreciate all of you. But, thinking about the terminology we even bring to our description of language and communication. On the left, we have European classical music. And on the right, we have contemporary music. And I was working with a student to develop these slides for our class, and the student just had classical music. And I said, wait, are you talking about the European classical tradition by any chance? Right? Because we have classical traditions across civilizations. And she said, yeah, you know what? You're right. Right? We had to sort of think about that. And that's some of the positive and real work that we can do as students when we're thinking about through these subjects. So again, it's really that we're trying to effect a transformative shift in those tacit norms for the subjects we teach. And what that means is that when we teach and combine that with OER, in my view, we're really helping to accelerate the reduction of harms. We're even helping to mitigate digital redlining in some cases because we're providing more access to materials. We're bringing down paywalls, for example. And then we're improving the success and retention for marginalized students because we're providing more opportunities for the students to see themselves in our course materials. So then the question is, how are you operationalizing this in your teaching? And how are you trying to go beyond tokenization, right? Beyond a simple spotlight or showcase of such and such a person, right? You can do that, and that is a good start, but how do you infuse that throughout more of your curriculum? How do you go beyond describing your teaching as anti-racist to making intentional adjustments? And really, honestly, I think this is the most radical thing we can do, is the work inside that classroom. We can be also strong and vocal and visible elements on our campus, but we can back that up, I think, by the work that we do with students on an everyday basis. All right, so I wanted to show you a view of my introductory linguistics course. So you're seeing that screen shot sort of roll through, and the way that I've organized this class into weekly modules, something you're familiar with, I'm sure. But you're seeing within that module how I walk through the concepts and then how I use a certain concept as an opportunity to bring difference into focus, right? And so in particular here, I'm bringing to students this idea of accents in a sign language, such as American Sign Language. And I'm trying to get them to think about difference beyond even race, right? Because many people are defensive about race and ethnicity as differences. So let's use this as an opportunity to walk them into the subject by focusing on other ways that we are different and good different in many ways too. So I want to share this video with you. This is that same video about accents in sign languages. And I want you to sort of think about what you notice and how does this make you feel. As you're responding to the video, go ahead and share your reactions in our Zoom chat. Here we go. And so one of the things you may be noticing already is there is no sound that accompanies this video, right? Because there doesn't need to be, right? This video is being communicated in English, sort of titling on the screen, but also in American Sign Language and a mainstream variety of American Sign Language with the primary speaker there. And so in the chat, you're thinking about how perhaps you have to work harder as a hearing person to connect. You're thinking about facial expressions, body language, and you may even be confronting that experience of watching a video with no sound. Whoa! Let's take another minute with this. All right, so you saw in that example that we have different sign languages from different communities around the world. Japan, we have considerations about age as a factor in accent and sign language. So there's so much that can work with this, and many ways to kind of think about how do you bring in transformative material that really challenges students to get outside of, say, their comfort zone, or really what we're talking about with a comfort zone is your norms, right? I think that's so exciting. And so let me give you a quick quiz here. Communication includes gestures and signs, right? So which one of these equals the idea of important? Is it A, B, or C? Can you put your answer into the chat? Someone saying A. Gail, thank you. Oh, many ideas, B or C. Aha. I love how Deborah's like, all of them. Feiruz as well. Thank y'all. You may be surprised. Let's take a moment.
To economic and racial justice. Police brutality has come.
And actually, I'm not sure that you're hearing my sound. Are you able to hear the sound of the video? Oh, fantastic.
The forefront, and more people in America are understanding the importance of this movement. Deaf people want to be involved in this. I try to be sensitive and see what the deaf community is using, and not just kind of, oh, it's this, and take ownership of that language. It's not my language. No justice, no peace. Basically, that phrase, your knee on my neck, looks like this. This is actually the knee on the neck. And so when you see that, it's like, oh, wow. The sign for white, as in like the color, crayon color, is white, but white people is signed like that. If you're talking about a white person, so why do white people have a different sign than the color? But traditionally, it's just been black the color, black the people, black this, black that. We've had one sign. But I became aware probably about 5 years ago, we're gonna make our own sign like this, black. So because I'm black, I would sign black like this. As a person who's not black, the sign should be this. And that's out of respect to the black culture, out of respect to the struggle. So I would sign Black Lives. You might also see people sign lives using that letter L handshake. And then you might see matter. This is how I sign matter, which actually means like cherish, adore, treasure. And you might see some people sign it like this, which means important or worthy. But I would sign Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. Deafness is not a white disability. It's not a white culture. So when you have an event, for example, like what's going on now with the revolution, with the protesting, with Black Lives Matter, and it's only coming through a white voice, it lacks that power, it lacks that cultural nuance, it lacks the complexities that someone who's Black would be able to bring to the table. There are deaf people amongst us all day, every day, and they're speaking out. They have things to say. They have things that they want to learn. It's not about the interpreter, it's about the deaf community and what it is that they want to say, and people aren't listening.
So thank you so much for kind of sticking with that bit of film there. And I think what we've learned there is that we can think about intersectionality in terms of language, in addition to some of the other social categories that we may be more familiar with in terms of gender, race, ethnicity, and so forth. I mean, I think that's a very interesting way to bring to students this idea of difference and why it matters, right? And so one of the things that we learned from Rory Burton, this ASL interpreter who was on the TV quite a bit during the pandemic years, interpreting for LA County officials and so forth, is that language has complexities that also connect to other social meanings. And that's just as important in a language like American Sign Language as it is in English, for example. And so this is something that I incorporate into my class and ask students to engage with, and give them a chance to connect some of our concepts to what they see in the video. And, you know, thinking about that journey that we bring students on, right? The change that we are encouraging them to take up. This is something that I don't bring to them in the first week of the class, but I might bring to them in the second week to try to provide more background with which to engage that information. And then really what we're dealing with here is an applied example of intersectionality. But then we'll talk about intersectionality, the term, for the first time in the week after this material. Just really trying to think about how do we layer and build up a curriculum that guides students into thinking about difference in multiple and complex ways, so that they are able to really follow what you're sharing with them and begin to think about themselves as a part of that change. And, you know, then I'll even have something more explicit about an intersectional approach. But I'm trying to present to students examples outside of maybe even my own countenance so that they can see that there are other people of different backgrounds who really value this material. And, you know, maybe that's where we then get some feedback from students. So, I mean, you know, if you're like me, you're always getting emails. And I, you know, got feedback from students that said, you know what, this worked for me because I was able to engage in a different way. And I am enjoying the content of this class. I mean, that's something you really want to get from a student, right? And, you know, then we can go into epistemological racism with students, thinking about how that idea that legitimate knowledge is a Eurocentric enterprise, that affects any discipline that we teach or anything that we try to get into, right? And so I want to just kind of transition as I close now with some thoughts about how we can move forward. And some of that I think is building on what you've already talked about, not only with the OFAR course that you we're in the fall, but now your work in implementing what you have dreamed of through your action plans. That our courses are affective experiences. There's emotion, there is energy, there is excitement, and there's challenge. And we are in the business here of choosing knowledge sources that can transform the norms that students come in with, but with a view towards an expansive and inclusive worldview. And I think that's the key, because you can find knowledge sources anywhere. You can transform a status quo in not so great ways. We're trying to do the positive end of that. And even through the images and imagery that we're using. So, the thumbs up there on the Canvas page, I have that in a brown sort of skin tone, and that can make just as much of an impact as saying to my students, I value anti-racism. Well, show me on the page. Help me feel valued and encouraged through the course material. And you are working on, in many cases, ways of adjusting your syllabi so that they communicate to students the warmness, the inclusiveness of your intention and your course policies. I think that's such an important endeavor, because in many cases, that's the first document that students come into contact with that lets them know that you value their presence and their success. And I think too that when you intentionally feature images of folks with different abilities, configurations of group and family, and also locations, contexts of engaging with your course, you're doing some really important work. Because it takes all kinds in the California community colleges. And as I was reminded by James, we take the top 100% of students, which means that really we're here for everybody. And, the other thing that I want to share with you is this idea of scaffolding your introduction of terminology, such as, say, intersectionality. Giving students multiple opportunities to come at that concept is something that I'm sure you're familiar with your own work. But just a reminder that we are asking students to grow, and that is not simple, that's not quick, and the resistance is naturally there. All right, so just kind of closing it up. And, I receive emails from students that also continue to try to, really challenge the work that I do. But I think the key here is that we really try to remind students that our intent is for them to succeed and to expand their thinking. And it's not about necessarily that we are trying to close off their possibility. And I think when we can communicate that successfully, then we're able to call those students in and help them stay a part of what we're trying to accomplish, right? So one of my strategies is to return to the success of all students if I receive some kind of adverse response. And that if I am experiencing some issues with students or other folks, that I become curious about what the reporting procedure about all of that is for my particular college or district. And that I find someone that I can trust, who I can share these incidents with, to talk to them, to get some feedback on what my next step should be, or and doing that in concert with documenting the repeated occurrences, the emails that you get or the threats and things like that, because you want to be able to show a pattern if one arises. And so at this moment, I kind of want to pause and invite folks to unmute or share in the Zoom chat other strategies you're using to work with students, to expand their thinking, and to respond to some of the adverse responses you might be receiving in this work. Any thoughts? I think, sometimes when we receive these types of emails and things, it's really easy to feel unnerved by strong student comments. And one of the things you might want to hit delete right away or just ignore the student's comment. And I think even if we do something like that we're missing an opportunity to try to engage the student in the sense that, and remind that student that they are one of many and that you're here for everybody. That was something that I chose to do with one of my students, and I can sort of just, I think, share a view of my response to that student. So let's see, let me just bring that back up here. If you'll just give me one moment. Sometimes the Zoom menu sort of disappears, and then I have to kind of just click the button and all of that jazz. All right. So how did I respond to a difficult student email? Did I delete it? Did I take some time? Did I ask a colleague? Yes. I asked a colleague for help. I paused to consider, and then I responded a couple days later. And I tried to do that with a sense of understanding of where that student is coming from. And so in this response, you're seeing that the student was responding to feedback that I gave that said, hey, let's capitalize the word Black because we're referring to a specific group of people. And so the student wanted to reiterate, let me make it clear, they say, that I am pro-Black and generally hate unfairness to anyone. I was in a physical altercation before when my Black friend was insulted at a party. I do not really see skin color, the student is saying. I see intelligence or lack thereof. I'm highly sensitive, highly aware, etc. This student saying, I took this class expecting linguistics, and it seems like this is really highly ideological. Okay, that's fine. I do enjoy the material, and I enjoy most of the way you teach. I don't like the multiple choice questions because I feel like I'm trying to figure out your sense of a word, et cetera, et cetera. So many of you may be getting kind of similar responses from students sometimes. And I wanted to share with you how I responded to that student. So I said, thank you. Glad you're receiving my feedback. And I hope this helps, right? I brought it back to the concepts that I'm trying to teach. I brought it back to the sort of rubric of ways that I'm evaluating their engagement with the material. And then I said, I hope that you'll embrace these many opportunities for self-reflection, because really that's where this course is going. I want to present you information, but I want you to try to figure out what that information means for you, right? So I didn't engage with the students sort of, I have a Black friend and all of that. I really kept it focused on what are we trying to accomplish in this course? And I think sometimes that's very helpful. Other students will, at the same time that you might have a detractor, other students are seeing the intent and power in what you're delivering. And so this is a student who really felt empowered and seen by some of our focus in the class on African American language. And sort of this idea that African American language is not just slang, right? It is a systematic and patterned communicative mode. And so those positives then sort of outnumber and outweigh the detractors. And then finally, just some thoughts about protecting ourselves, right? And I'm seeing that you're starting to write into the chat some of your, the ways that you've responded or have had to respond to students that are putting up resistance to what you're sharing. Another way that we can sort of protect ourselves is to be mindful of what we're presenting when we're on Zoom, right? There's been instances of folks recording what maybe folks are sharing on Zoom and then sharing that out, social media and so forth. So what I have tried to do is include citations when I'm talking about sensitive material to sort of show that it's not me saying this, but it is part of something that we're studying. And I think this helps to prevent slides from being misinterpreted, out of context, et cetera. For example, in my class, we talked about an incident at UCLA where Asian students were mocked by a white student that mocked them by saying ching chong in the library space where these students were studying. And so we looked at a response by one of those students to that mockery, that mock Chinese language, who embraced this phrasing of ching chong, but turned it into kind of a subversive song. Okay. So in bringing that up, right, the phrase ching chong can be offensive, but I want to make it clear that this is an object of study, right? So that's why I have a citation there. I also have other information about where I'm grabbing this information. I think that helps to make sure that we're doing this in ways that also protect us as well. All right. So again, just some parting thoughts and a thank you, because it brings a lot to me to be able to talk with you and learn from you in these contexts. And I hope that's lasting and transformative for you as well. So thank you so much. So I will turn it back over to Laura, or we can look at any questions folks might have. But I really appreciate your engagement, especially in the